Well, good morning. Thank you very much. First question I have for you, has anyone here in here even seen the show Narcos? Oh, thank you very much. You're all our new best friends. And if you haven't seen the show, we hope that after today, maybe you'll go log in and check it out, because the more times you log in, the longer our contracts run. So it's all about business, right? Now, the truth is, our contracts are over. We were only involved with the first 2 years, filming the first 2 years. So, but we are honored to be here with you this morning. Thank you very much for giving us a few minutes of your time. And so what are we going to talk about for the next 4 hours since we're in here? Dan's looking like, get the hook, pull them off here. Now, what we want to do quickly this morning is tell you the true story about a man who was willing to risk everything. And we're here at a risk management conference, right? A man who was willing to risk himself, his family, his business, his life, his soul, to become the world's largest cocaine trafficker. That's what we want to talk about. We're going to tell you how he earned his money, how he became so powerful that he was able to declare war on his own country 2 times. I mean, think about it. Whatever country you're from, think about you and your associates declaring war on your own country. It's monumental, right? It's unbelievable. We're going to show you what he did with his wealth. We'll take you inside of his famous ranch, Finca Napoles. We're going to talk about what we call the deal of a lifetime. This is a deal that Pablo Escobar was able to garner with his home government to surrender. A deal that is unbelievable. It's the most ridiculous thing we've ever heard of in law enforcement. But we're going to ask you to put yourself in the position of the government officials. What would you do? We'll talk about it. We're going to take you inside of his custom-built prison, a prison that he named the cathedral. Now, in our country, we call cathedrals churches. We don't call our prisons the cathedrals, right? That's how ridiculous this thing is. And we'll talk about his escape, the last few months of Pablo's life. And at the very end, we want to introduce you to the true heroes of this entire investigation, but it's because it's not us. Okay, so we'll leave you with that tidbit of information. Hopefully, we'll have a little bit of time at the end of the presentation for a Q&A. We ask you now to start thinking about your questions. We'll talk about the investigation itself. We'll talk about the making of the show Narcos. We'll even talk about our personal lives to a certain degree. And if you're familiar with the show, and if we have enough time, we might even talk about his sex life. And if you've seen the show, you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't, now you got to go watch the show, right? So, a little bit of marketing going on here. Just one word of warning, there are a few graphic photos in here. Before they come up, there's a warning sign that says graphic photos. Now, we like to have a little fun when we're on stage with you because this is a very dark topic. But when we say graphic photos, we're not kidding about that. If it bothers you, when you see that warning slide, just close your eyes. We won't leave them up there very long. We don't put those up there to make people think we're tough guys. We're really not. We're a couple of small town country boys that got to work a really big investigation. That's all we are. There's nothing heroic about that. But we do put it up there because if you've seen the show and you see the violence that's depicted, it's much worse. And that's the reason we include these photos. So we want people to know this was worse than what you think it was. Okay? Are we ready to go? Okay, y'all got to wake up now. Are y'all ready to go? Yes. There we go. Ladies and gentlemen, this is my partner, Javier Pena.
Appreciate it. Thank you again for inviting us here. We're going to talk about, again, the Medellin cartel that was led by Pablo Escobar. And we talk about it because this is a lesson in history into how one person challenged his own country and actually won. Pablo Escobar was the inventor of narco-terrorism. This is the first time he got arrested in Medellin, and he got arrested because the cops that were on the tape wanted more bribe money. Pablo didn't want to pay it. He was in jail for about 5 minutes. He finally paid the money, and all he said, you know what, charge the gringos more money for cocaine. I get to Medellin 1988, and we have an informal task force, not like the one we participated in after the escape. I'll always remember the first day I get there, I get picked up by 3 different set of police cars, undercover guys. And the first question they asked me was, Javier, you got a gun? I said, yeah. Pull it out. We used to drive our guns by our chest because of Pablo Escobar's sicarios. In the mid-'80s, we were experiencing a bloodbath in Miami. We were seeing Colombians killed in the middle of the daylight. a lot of bodies, there was one lady in Miami that was probably just as ruthless as this. Her name was Griselda Blanco. She herself killed a lot of people. Anyway, she was finally arrested. She was working for Pablo Escobar. She was deported back, she went back to Medellin, and I think it was 2012. She lasted on the streets for 2 weeks before two guys on a motorcycle, what they had perfected. The guy in the back have shot her. They have shot all of her family members, traffickers. Do not forget. And I understand that J-Lo is going to be making about a movie and portraying Griselda Blanco. I don't know how she's going to be able to pull it off because Griselda was uglier than shit. So we'll see about that. This guy's down here are the famous Ochoa brothers. There are three brothers on the bottom. I'm putting one of them in jail. They were always afraid of Pablo Escobar. They never challenged him. They were pretty rich in Medellin, a lot of Paso Fino horses. Anyway, they're kind of famous. We had an informant that was working for DEA, was working for the CIA, a guy by the name of Barry Seal. And Barry Seal is the one who took a lot of photos on Escobar. The Ochoas testified. The Ochoas were the ones that ordered the hit on Barry Seal. He was killed in Louisiana in the mid-'80s. And again, Tom Cruise just came out on a movie about Barry Seal. Now, the guy on the far right, Jose Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha, was probably richer than Pablo Escobar. And if you've seen the Narcos series, the actor that plays him is probably the most recognized actor in the Narcos series, Luis Guzman. Anyway, he had cornered the emerald market. I mean, he killed off all the competition, that's why. But he's the inventor of the cocaine labs, very dangerous, richer than Pablo Escobar. Escobar used to have to hold him back. 1989, we infiltrated an informant, we shot him. And again, when we're chasing him, he's throwing grenades, shooting. When we find the body, the guy still had 10 grenades on his belt line. The guy who never got the credit was the guy in the middle, Gustavo Gaviria Rivera, Pablo Escobar's first cousin. They grew up together. Pablo grew up poor. They loved each other. They started doing 1-2 kilos at a time. Before you knew it, Pablo was responsible for 80% of the cocaine. Now, keep in mind, there was no extradition between Colombia and the United States. So the United States was starting to put a lot of pressure on Colombia. Remember the first guy, Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, talked about bringing back extradition. Pablo Escobar kills the justice minister. Two guys on a motorcycle. The guy in the back shot him. Guillermo Cano, the leading paper in Colombia, writes an all-bad piece, Pablo, about bringing back extradition. Pablo Escobar puts a bomb and kills the owner of the newspaper. Again, very, very violent. Now, you're going to hear the stories that Pablo Escobar was a Robin Hood. Escobar was no Robin Hood. You know what? And I'm going to tell you, Escobar had great leadership skills. He used to go down to the barrios of Medellin. He personally would recruit the sicarios, 13, 14, 15-year-old thugs. I talked to a lot of them. They used to love Pablo. He'd hug them, kiss them, give them money. I remember one guy told me he takes care of my mother. She's got a roof over her head. Our allegiance is to Pablo Escobar. And I'm going to tell you right now, and I'm not anti-Catholic, even the Catholic Church in Medellin was in favor of Pablo Escobar. There was a priest, if you don't believe me, Google him, Father Rafael Garcia Herreros, who used to come out on TV saying Escobar was a good person because of all the money he gave to the Catholic Church. Again, Escobar killed between 10 to 15,000 innocent people. One of the sicarios just got out of jail, guy by the name of Popeye. He's claiming the figure is more like 50,000 people. Anyway, Escobar cornered the Mexican market, the Central America, Panama, remember General Noriega, the Caribbean, and we weren't going to mention it, but they used a lot in the country of Haiti back then. There was kind of a famous president. Have y'all remember John Bertrand Aristide, president in Haiti in the mid-'80s? President Aristide was a drug trafficker. He was receiving a lot of money from Pablo Escobar. You know who pardoned him? Steve, you want to have mentioned it? Well, we don't want to mention the name, but.
Yeah, there was a president, but we don't like to embarrass the presidents. But we'll tell you that his wife ran for office in the United States last year, so you could probably figure that out, right?
Would not let us indict President Aristide. I said, politics at its best. Again, we never figure out the sicarios. Like I said, he had about 500 sicarios working for him. This is some pictures of Gacha. The bullet came from the top down, pretty much lost his head that day. His son, Freddie, was with him, Gustavo Gaviria. We had him, surrounded him, and we wanted him alive. He comes out with a machine gun. We had to kill him. Pablo Escobar never forgave us for the death of his cousin. Again, they loved each other. They were always together. and Gustavo was the brains of the Medellin cartel. This is pictures of the famous Avianca bombing. Escobar put a bomb on a commercial airline. Avianca was going from Bogota to Cali. About 100 people were killed. And you know what? It was all innocent people that day. There was no informants. There was no police officers, no politicians. It was just innocent people. It was orchestrated by this guy, La Kika, under the orders of Pablo Escobar. They snuck a bomb into the airplane. When they took off, they flipped a switch. They thought, the other Sicario thought it was a recording device, blew up. He's serving a couple of life sentences right now. And you know what? He was there when we arrested him. We followed him, and we arrested him in New York City. He was there the following week. The United Nations was meeting where the president of Colombia, Cesar Gaviria, was going to be speaking. Pablo Escobar was going to try to assassinate the president of Colombia at the United Nations. The DOS building, another bomb, 500 kilogram, hated General Miguel Massa Marquez, tried to kill him 7 different times, puts 500 kilogram bomb on 12/6/89. About 120 people were killed. Innocent people working at the DOS building. It's like they were local FBI office. We were about 5 miles away at our embassy. Our embassy shook when this bomb went off. This is what caused Pablo Escobar's downfall. Remember, as I mentioned, there was no extradition. Colombians were getting tired of the traffickers. And let me just mention, 99.9% of Colombians are good, hardworking, innocent people. Is at 1%. Luis Carlos Galan was running for president under the premise, if elected, I am bringing back extradition. He was going to win. Pablo Escobar kills him on a Friday night. I'll never forget that. The president of Colombia, Virgilio Barco Vargas, calls up our ambassador. Can you imagine killing your next president of your country? Galan was loved by everybody. The president calls, says, you know what, I'm tired about Pablo Escobar. I have just signed a piece of paper where I am authorizing extradition. So the next day we started extraditing anybody associated with Escobar. It was great. We were probably extradited about 30 of his top traffickers. What happened? Escobar calls up the president, declares war on Colombia. People, war we did see. We started seeing car bombs, 10 to 15 on a daily basis, that muffled sound. Then you would see that black smoke rising, debris. Then you would see body parts. He was putting them at shopping centers. He put one at a bookstore where little kids were buying their books to go back to school. He had the audacity of dropping leaflets, those extraditables. I prefer a tomb in Colombia than a jail cell in the United States. Can you believe that? He was dropping leaflets saying, I am responsible. Then he put bounties on police officers, $100 a head. Thousands of police officers were killed. He started kidnapping important politicians, anybody that would listen, and it was being done to put pressure on Colombia. Steve and I went to a funeral where we had 8 coffins in the church. One of our good friends, a major, Pablo Escobar, killed. I mean, it was just being at the wrong time, at the wrong place. We would leave the search block, there'd be bombs all over the place, the kidnappings. It was just, now, this guy was an informant of mine. I don't like to put it too much, but they did all sorts of stuff to him. Pablo Escobar hated informants. I had 5 killed, and I'm not proud of it, during my tenure by Pablo Escobar. He would instruct his sicarios, do not just kill them, I want you to torture them. I want you to find out what's going on, what they're talking about him. I listened to a phone call with Pablo Escobar and his wife, and we heard a guy yell. They were torturing the guy. He covers the phone, says, cover his mouth. Starts talking to his wife, how much he loves her, how much he misses her. I know we got some risk, security type people. You know how we, to intercept the phone, man, it's like, you need like Tolstoy, a couple of novels, right? Back in Medellin, we would pay the phone guy and we'd be up on the phone. We didn't need no stinking probable cause back then. Anyway, these are camouflage labs in the jungle. And this is what used to come out of those labs. They were manufacturing 1,000 kilos of cocaine on a daily basis. To manufacture 1 kilo was $1,000. To send it to Miami, $4,000. Your initial investment was $5,000. And I know there's some financial guys here. You know how much that kilo was going for in Miami in the 80s? $80,000. If you would take it to Europe, you were going to be getting $100,000 for that 1 kilo. That's why Forbes magazine had him the 7th richest person in the world. You know what? And he had his own recycling plants. At least he was going green at this time. That's a caleta, a hole in the ground. That's what came out of that hole. 10 tons of cocaine, and besides this hole, he had about 20, 30 tons of cocaine in Colombia. This was why Pablo Escobar was responsible for 80%, and this is why he was so rich.
Thanks, JP. So we wanted to show you some of the smuggling methods that we encountered during this time. And just keep in mind, there's only one limitation when it comes to smuggling anything. It doesn't have to be dope. It doesn't have to be money. And that limitation is simply your imagination. And here are some examples of that. The top left photograph, they're taking Coke cans, they unseal the Coke, they pour out the liquid Coke, they fill it with powder cocaine, seal the can back up, but that's Coke in a Coke can. Is that illegal? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. But it's not false advertising, so it's okay, right? Coke in a Coke can. And then the bottom right photograph, and this is how simple it could be. They take grapefruit, they slice the grapefruit down the middle, they scoop the pulp out, they put little baggies of powder cocaine in there, literally glued the two halves back together, put it in those mesh bags and shipped it, and it worked. Now this was pre-9/11 in our country, so the security in the United States airports wasn't quite as tight as it is now. And if you've been to the US, you know what I'm talking about. The aircraft. So there's a lot of stories that we could tell you about this, but I took these photographs in 1989 in the Bahama Island chain. We're out flying patrol with the US Coast Guard and the Bahamian National Police, and we come across this aircraft. And the one in the middle, and I'm looking at that, and I'm telling the two pilots, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's an airplane crash. You know, we need to get boats in here, we need divers, we need an investigative team, we need to go talk to the FAA, and all your little investigative senses kick in. And the two pilots are laughing at me. Now, I'd been a cop at this time. I'd been a cop about 18 years. And if you know any police officers, we have a sixth sense of humor, just to be honest. But I'm looking at the pilots going, guys, that's not funny. And they said, Murph, you don't even know what you're looking at. This is nothing more than the cost of doing business for the narcotics traffickers. They'll spend a couple $100,000 on each airplane. It really depends on the avionics package that goes in there. They find a shallow place. They send a loaded plane of cocaine up to that area. They call this landing, I call it crashing, because you're not supposed to do that with an airplane, right? But when that plane stops in the water, they've got boats waiting. The boats come in, they get the cocaine off, they get the two pilots off, and away they go. I took these photos in 1989. Today, those aircraft are still in the ocean down there. If you've ever been to the Bahamas, you know how beautiful the water is down there. I mean, it's one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. But what they didn't take off these aircraft, they didn't take the aviation fuel. They didn't take the hydraulic fluid. They didn't take the oil. And so you can imagine what the salt water is doing to the metal components of that aircraft. It's rusting, and those caustic chemicals now are leaking out into the beautiful ocean down there. It's killing the wildlife. It's killing the reefs. I'm not a tree hugger, but I think it is beautiful. But that is the legacy of Pablo Escobar, one of death and destruction. All these years after his death, all these years later after his death, we're still seeing death and destruction because of this man. The boats, the go-fast boats. Has anybody ever been on a go-fast boat on the ocean? I'm the only idiot in here that did that. Because I did it once, I will never do it again. 80 miles an hour on the ocean. How do you stop a vessel at 80 miles an hour on the ocean? You see that helicopter in the middle? They have a 30 caliber machine gun on board. The gunners, their accuracy is good enough that they can take out the motors on those vessels at 80 miles an hour. It's unbelievable. Some of the other methods we encountered, top left photograph, a cargo container, basically the back end of a tractor trailer. Top right, they take the cocaine and they shape it in the form of the conveyance in which they're going to hide it. In this case, it was a truck tire. Bottom left, now you got this jerk who straps cocaine on his butt, and nobody thinks nobody's going to notice that big booty walking through the airport back there, you know. You know how we know he's in custody? Do any of you have a stainless steel toilet in your house? And then the bottom right photograph, and just to get serious just for a second here, and I'll pose a hypothetical question to you. How desperate would you have to be in your personal life that you're willing to take condoms filled with cocaine or heroin that have been sealed in wax, dipped in olive oil, and then you sit at a table and you swallow those, and you'll swallow up to 800 grams, 2 pounds of cocaine or heroin? My gosh, how desperate do you have to be to do that? Why would anybody do that? I mean, who's this guy that we've got in the picture? Well, you know what? He's a campesino. He's a poor farmer in Colombia. This man might make $60 a week in income. He might only make $60 a month. Now, they're going to offer him $10,000 and a round-trip ticket to Miami to do this. If, when he gets to Miami, if they decide they want to save $10,000 and they just kill him. So the hypothetical question is, how desperate would we have to be in our lives to do something like that? You know, we pray that nobody in this room or your families are ever in a situation like that. It's just horrible. Now, this is what I had to put up with every day coming to the embassy. This Javier sitting behind his desk. He's got his bling on. He's counting his money. You can see his gold-plated 45 laying on the table there, because in the United States, when you go overseas, DEA gives you a gold-plated 45. You believe that, right?
I had to support all the so-called girlfriends I had.
There you go. And today's all about telling the truth here, so you heard from the man right there. What you really need to look at in that photograph is that $10 Casio watch he's got on.
That's all I could afford.
That's what we could afford back then. This was taken from Pablo Escobar. This money. I've never seen, I'm not even going to ask you guys because I know a lot of you have. I've never seen a gold bar. I've never seen a silver coin. I don't know how much money's up there. You don't go into law enforcement for the money, right? I think if I counted my money out with you now, I've got about $23 that my wife gave me to come all the way to Amsterdam from Washington, D.C. So the point is here, I don't know how much that is, but it belonged to Pablo. Now, do you think he got mad because we took his money? Yeah, he probably did. But do you think he lost any sleep? No, it's just the cost of doing business for him. Now, Javier told you Forbes magazine rated him as the 7th richest man in the world. That's not the United States government making up statistics. What we call that, the alternate truth now? That's Forbes magazine. His estimated wealth was between $8 and $30 billion. I can't fathom how much money that is. What's $1 billion? And you guys are up here looking at me like, well, hell, everybody in here knows what that is. What's wrong with you, you know? I just don't understand what that is. Now, what would you do with that kind of wealth if you had it? Would you put it in a bank account in a financial institution? Because if you do, we're very good. DEA, in conjunction with its international law enforcement partners, we're very good at finding those accounts. And when we do, we take them and we fight. We don't want to give them back because we know it's illegally earned money, right? We want to keep that money. Well, Pablo knew that too. So he invested in real estate. These are some photographs of multi-million-dollar properties in Colombia. It's rumored that he owned as many as 800 properties. All of these properties were beautiful. He brought in Italian architects because he wanted the nicest properties he could have. Every one of those properties had a caleta. Remember Javier showed you the caleta with the 10 tons of coke? Javier went on a search warrant in one of those houses. The caleta was the swimming pool on hydraulics. You push the button, the whole swimming pool picks up out of the ground and moves out of the way. I mean, how much can you hide under a swimming pool, right? What'd you find in there?
Nothing there.
Nothing there. Pablo never even stepped foot in any of those properties. It's just an investment for him to come back to later. This was Pablo's pride and joy. Finca Napoles, we've heard everything from 1,000 to 10,000 acres, whatever it is. It was huge. You can see the airstrip there where his little drug buddies would fly in and have their parties. You see the entrance there with an airplane on top. Pablo liked to brag to everybody. There, you see that plane? That's the first airplane I ever used to move a little cocaine. Now this sits out on the main highway where citizens drive up and down every day, and you see that monstrosity sitting there, right? And you know what? Government officials drive up and down there every day and see it also. So what's Pablo really doing there? He's sending a message. And his message is, hey, Governor of Colombia, come on through the gate and get me if you think you're tough enough. But you know what? I'm Pablo Escobar. And unfortunately, during that first manhunt, we weren't tough enough to go in there and get him. But we came on pretty strong in the second half. Now, this is the bottom right photograph. It's not a very good picture of the house, but just a quick story about that swimming pool. I live in Washington, D.C. Javier lives in San Antonio, Texas. When we have a cookout or a barbecue in our backyard, we have friends come over. It's 3, 4, maybe 5 hours on a long evening, right? Probably the same as most of you. Have your friends, family, neighbors come over. Well, when these guys have a barbecue, it's 3 to 5 days. 5-day barbecue. Could you do it? I couldn't even done that when I was a young man, much less as an old guy. So Javier, he's the master of informants. I'm very serious about that. I mean, he did have a lot that were killed, but I've never met anybody in my almost 38 years of law enforcement that was better at recruiting informants than Javier was. So he's got an informant that's working one of these barbecues. When the party's over, he comes out and he calls Javier and he's like, man, you're not going to believe what happened this time. He said, we were like day 3 or day 4 of this barbecue or this party, and everybody was just blitzed out of their minds because they've been smoking weed, they've been snorting coke, they've been drinking alcohol. And one of the sicarios, one of the assassins comes up to Pablo and he goes, hey, boss, one of the waiters is stealing your silverware. Well, the man's worth $30 billion. Does he care about a knife, a fork, and a spoon? Yeah, he did. So he said, you know what, bring him up here. So you hear how quiet it is in here? You know this hush came over the crowd right then because they're like, oh crap, what's he going to do this time, right? So Pablo gets him up there and he talks to him one-on-one and finally looks over at one of Sicarios and he says, go get me some duct tape. So they bring the tape out, they tape the man's hands behind his back, tape his feet together, and Pablo kicks him in that swimming pool. And your entertainment for the next several minutes is watching a man drown. Wow, over a piece of silverware? If he's willing to do that over silverware, what would he do if he took his money or his property or maybe killed his cousin or put his family in jail? Talk about risks, risk management. Takes it to a whole different level, doesn't it?
All right, 1991, and because of the violence and people, it was bad. People in Colombia were leaving Colombia. People did not want to go out at night. So Pablo Escobar, remember when I said challenge this country won? He calls up the president and says, Mr. President, I am willing to stop my bombing campaign and I am willing to self-surrender. Governor of Colombia was ecstatic. Thank you, thank you. He says, hold on, got certain conditions. I'm going to build my own prison where I will surrender. I'm going to hire my own prison guards and I'll pay for them. I'm going to take my own sicarios so they can protect me and nobody can come and visit me. And he negotiated a 5-year prison sentence. Governor of Colombia accepted that deal. That was one of the worst days in my life because of all the innocent people Escobar killed. Basically, we had lost and Pablo Escobar had won. He's been in jail for 1 year. He's got 4 more to go. So one night, a couple of his sicarios are in Medellin. They come across a bag of money, about $10 million. The money had deteriorated. It hadn't been buried properly. Nobody could use it. So they take it back to Pablo in prison and said, hey, boss, look what your 2 favorite sicarios, and this is the real story, have been holding out on you. He had 2 guys, Moncada and Galliano, who were doing most of the loads while he was in prison. So he says, call them into I want to talk to them. So in they come, and Moncada is the first one to see the money, and he knows what Pablo's thinking. Boss, it's not what you're thinking. We haven't been holding out on you. I'll be honest, I buried that money 10 years ago, and I forgot where I buried it, and I believe that story. They're trying to talk to Pablo. He's not saying much. All of a sudden, he picks up a stick, and he kills his best friend, the guys who are doing the loads. The other sicarios kill the other guy. That night, he orders a bloodbath. He tells all his sicarios, going to Medellin, kill Moncada family, Galliano family, steal all of their assets. That information, we're able to take it to the government. They decide to move him. They send about 20 Colombian military guys. They come into the prison. Mr. Escobar, we have to move you. Pablo Escobar has a firefight. His prison guards with the military. Pablo Escobar walks out of that prison that night with his sicarios. The next day, we're at the prison, and you're going to be surprised at what we found.
So we'll take you inside of the cathedral now. You can see it's flying in on the helicopters. Just take a closer look. See the perimeter fence? Just keep in mind, that's not to keep the bad guys in. That's to keep the good guys out because of that deal. I mean, is that ridiculous? A man who's responsible for tens of thousands of murders and innocent deaths, who's worth $30 billion, who was able to negotiate a 5-year prison sentence in his custom-built prison. There were no stipulations to take any of his assets. He got to keep the $30 billion, by the way. So let's go inside. This is what Pablo Escobar calls a prison cell. Now, don't raise your hand if you've ever been in a jail cell, but is this what you expect it to look like? A 2-room suite? The top photograph, I'm in the kitchen looking at the front door. The bottom photograph, I'm in the front door looking at the kitchen. You can see a microwave oven, a full-size refrigerator, a banana bar stools, color-coordinated draperies and upholstery, which we have in the United States. It's all steel gray, though. It's not the flowered pattern like that. And you look at the top photograph again. You see the couch there above the couch, the artwork? That's not paint by numbers. That's not finger painting. One of those is a Dali original. These are multi-million-dollar works of art. The big one, there's a famous artist in Colombia named Botero. That large one is a Botero original that Pablo paid about $1.5 million for. Does that make him an art connoisseur? No, it makes him a man with a lot of money that doesn't know what he's doing, right? It's exactly what it makes. Now, you remember at the very beginning, Javier showed you that wanted poster with Pablo and all his henchmen on there? Pablo liked that so much he had it framed and hanging in his prison cell. He was very proud of that. And you see behind Javier in that picture, a couple of pictures hanging on the wall. We blew those up. The top one is Pablo and his cousin Gustavo dressed as American gangsters. The bottom one is Pablo dressed up like Pancho Villa from Mexico. That's the persona he wanted to portray to the world, that he's a tough guy, a gangster. I don't know if he's a tough guy. He was howling weed every day of his life. He was a violent guy. He had no conscience. He'd kill you in a heartbeat. This goes into the second room of the 2-room suite. The bed's custom built, larger than any king-size bed we've ever seen. The 2 police officers are going through Pablo's audio-visual center there. They didn't have cable TV, satellite TV, direct TV, Netflix, things like that. But he did have all the latest and greatest releases of movies and TV shows from around the world. Because we got $30 billion, I guess you could do stuff like that, right? You come down to the bottom, you see the desk there. Now that DEA cap, Pablo didn't have that. We planted it there because I just thought it was funny, and I still think it's funny because that's Pablo's prison cell. But in front of that cap, you see those little 4 statuettes? Those are statues of Colombian National Police officers. Why does Pablo have those on his desk? It's because when people would come in to meet Pablo, he was sitting back like Mr. High and Mighty. He'd lean over and he'd say, "You see those? That represents the government of Colombia. I own them. I own the whole government here. I'm Pablo Escobar." Take a little closer look. The photographs behind his desk. The photo on the left, Pablo took all his mug shots and had those matted in frame because that's so much nicer than just framing a picture, right? Not his family. Well, there's a picture of him and his son standing in front of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Washington, D.C. We call that the White House. That's kind of scary for us. The photograph on the bottom right there, it's hard to see, but that's Pablo's hero. That's his mentor. It's a guy named Che Guevara. That's who Pablo wanted to pattern himself out as, a devout communist. The other prisoners, you can see they were roughing it. They had 2-room suites, but maybe not quite as nice as Pablo. I promise you, there's no other prison in the world that looks like this.
Anyway, Los Pepes, we're coming to the end here. This is kind of personal because I get accused of being a member of Los Pepes. There's an author who wrote Killing Pablo Barkbon, which is absolutely not true. Anyway, remember the 2 guys that they killed, Moncada and Galliano, inside the prison? This is real stuff. Their head of security, a guy by the name of Don Berna, gets all the traffickers together, and they start going after Escobar dirty. Their main goal is to kill Escobar's family members. And remember the placards, the extraditables? They started putting Los Pepes. That way Pablo Escobar knew exactly that it was them killing him. This is the real Don Berna. Now, guys, those who have seen the series, doesn't he look exactly like the actor? Wow, they did a great job. Anyway, real quick, Don Berna was always at the search block, and we lived with him. We went out on operations, Steve and I, every day. We broke policies, rules, and we never broke the law. I always asked the Colonel, this guy's kind of suspicious. He knows us. We know him. I know him. He says, "Javier, he's been authorized by the Colombian Attorney General to help us. I do not trust him either." Anyway, in real life, he is the head of Los Pepes, and I know him. And if you've seen the Narco series, I just got to explain to you, I'm not dirty. A lot of people think that I was dirty. The way that happened is Netflix called me up and says, "Javier, we know you're not dirty, but we're going to put you out a little bit to be on the dirty side. And by the way, can you sign a piece of paper, a waiver? That way you don't sue us." And you know what? I was making money. I didn't give a shit. I signed that bullshit piece of paper. Now I'm known as being dirty. Now that is the truth. Anyway, later on, Don Berna gets extradited. After Pablo gets killed, he becomes the biggest trafficker in Colombia. We extradite him. In real life, he hooked up Judy Moncada in the series, real person. Real life, beautiful lady, and the actress is beautiful, and I get accused of going out with her. That did not happen. Anyway, they go to Cali cartel, so they get a lot of money. Pablo and Cali hated each other, and they were being financed to do all the atrocities from Pablo Escobar. Escobar was so, like I said, he wanted his family out of Colombia. He tried to put them on a plane to Miami. I was there. We took him off. He puts them on a plane to Frankfurt, Germany. U.S. authorities get involved. They're not allowed to stay in Germany, so they come back, and Steve's going to talk about that, his final day.
Okay, so just to set the scenario here, we've got Pablo in Medellin. His wife and 2 children are in Bogota in a hotel controlled by the Colombian government where they could be protected. Pablo is still wanting to negotiate a surrender because that first one worked so well, right? And nobody will talk to him. He's calling the president's office and they won't answer the phone. He's calling members of Congress, they won't talk to him. He's calling the press and they won't take his calls. Who can he talk to? The only person who'll talk to him is his family. So he's talking to his son, Juan Pablo. Well, the telephone technology back in that time was not the 3G, 4G, or 5G like we enjoy today. It was basically radio phones. The phones worked off of radio frequencies. If you know anything about the frequency spectrum, there are thousands of frequencies in that spectrum. So the challenge is you have to scan all these frequencies in the hope of finding the frequency that the person you're looking for is speaking at the exact moment you go across that frequency. We call that trying to find a needle in a haystack, right? It's almost impossible. Our CIA buddies were trying to do that. If you've seen the show and it shows us that we don't get along with the CIA, that's 100% accurate. We did not get along with them. And just so you know, do you know what CIA stands for? Clowns in Action. So what we have is we're up in Medellin living with the Colombian National Police in the search block. So over here, what you have is you have Pablo Escobar talking to his son, Juan Pablo Escobar. We call that the bad guy father-son team. On this side, you have Lieutenant Martinez, who is the man who truly found Pablo Escobar on December 1993, talking to his father, Colonel Martinez, who was the head of the search block. We call that the good guy father-son team. Sounds like a plot for a show called Narcos, doesn't it? Let's watch a video and we'll finish up.
He started talking again, and I followed the signal to the point where the equipment showed me the exact location he was in. I turned around and passed by the front again. And with the radio in my hand, I put my hand out the window and started pointing at the window in the second floor. At the same time that I was pointing, I observed the silhouette of Pablo Escobar with the phone in his hand. I was listening, and he looked through the window. We saw each other.
He calls me and tells me I have located him with a zero margin of error. Furthermore, he tells me I'm looking at him. I tell them that they should wait for the search block. But if they had to confront him, to do so.
And so Hugo went around to the back of the building, and some of the men with him staked out the front door.
Pablo Escobar was very calm. We did not see him trying to make any escape attempts. He was very still, maybe waiting for luck to help him again. But this time he was surrounded.
Hugo Aguilar's team reaches the scene and immediately makes the assault.
Pablo hadn't noticed anything peculiar and was still talking on the phone with his son Juan Pablo when the explosive charge went off on the door downstairs.
We began going up the stairs. I was up front. Pablo Escobar said, "There is something going on here. I'll call you back." He threw the telephone. He ran to the window and he went into the abyss.
Escobar's lone bodyguard, Limon, is the first to reach the window.
The man that was with Pablo Escobar came out of the house and jumped, and he headed in our direction, shooting.
Limon attempted to race across the rooftop. He was apparently shot on his way across the roof. His momentum carried him right off the roof, and he landed on the grass behind the garage.
Then Pablo Escobar appeared. He had two guns in his hands.
Pablo began trying to inch his way out along a wall that bordered the rooftop, looking for some avenue of escape.
He was talking to the police with such rage and shooting in and out of the house. When he was against the wall, we were not able to get a line of fire to hit him. He started walking to the front. And since the roof goes up, we started seeing more of his body. And at that moment, he fell.
When the firing stopped, I looked and I saw him lying on the roof. I took the radio and said, "Viva Colombia, Pablo Escobar is dead."
Look at the world's richest, most barbaric narco-trafficker in his heyday, had hundreds of bodyguards. Towards the end, had one guy left.
So we're out of time here, but there's just a couple thoughts we want to leave you with here very quickly. You look at these photographs here. Do you see anybody that looks unhappy, except maybe the dead guy?
Pablo.
And you see the guy in the red shirt in that bottom photograph? Well, that idiot is me. Now, I was a police officer for almost 38 years. I'm proud of my career. I don't know how to do anything else other than to stand in front of you and act like an idiot. But everywhere I go, well, not everywhere I go, as you can imagine, I've caught a lot of grief over that. A lot of places that we go, people challenge me over that photograph, and they say, you know, you're proud of the fact that you were a police officer, but your job, your responsibility is to protect human life and property. But here you are standing over a dead guy smiling. How do you explain that? And this is the way I explain it every single time. The reason we're all smiling in those pictures is because we all knew, effective at the very second that man passed away, every citizen in the country of Colombia was safer, simply because one man's dead. Now, it's easy to stand up here and make accusations and claims that you're unable to check while you're sitting here as a captive audience, right? But I challenge you to go check this, and this is what you'll find. In 1992 and 1993, Medellin, Colombia was the murder capital of the entire world. There were times that we'd get to go home to Bogota on the weekends. We'd leave on a Saturday morning. We'd come back on Monday morning. There had been as many as 300 murders over the weekend in 2 days, a city of 2 million people. So what we did is we looked at the murder rate in Medellin, Colombia prior to Pablo's death. We waited a few months afterwards and we checked the murder rate, and what we found was the murder rate in Medellin, Colombia had dropped by almost 80%. Do I feel any remorse or grief or discomfort because of this photograph? Absolutely not. In my opinion, that man got exactly what he deserved that day.
The real heroes in all of this, definitely not the spokes, not us, were the search block of the Colombia National Police, Colonel Martinez and their guys. They took their country back because of all the bloodshed that was done by one person. We want to thank you. I know we went over a little bit on the time, so
A few minutes for questions?
yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.